Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Jason's Take On. Today, we're really excited to have two guests with us. We have Dave Duke from MetaCX and Matt Sweezey from Salesforce. Today, we will be talking about the performance economy and looking at the discussion around experience versus outcomes, and really trying to get the thoughts and insights from these two experienced leaders in the field who have a lot to say on the matter and also recently published an ebook. So we're really excited to welcome you both here. To jump right in, Dave and Matt, please just take a second to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your background and your organizations and how we got to this topic.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us, guys. Really good to be with you. And a little bit about me. I've been in SaaS for about 15 years and I grew up professionally at a MarTech company called ExactTarget, which is now part of Salesforce. It's where Matt and I first met. It's the Salesforce Marketing Cloud now. And really grown to appreciate the power of customer management, customer experience in business as a whole. And most recently, I've co-founded MetaCX with a few others, and we're off to the races trying to think about better ways to bring buyers and suppliers together to collaborate. And excited to unpack this ebook today. Think a lot about experience and the relationship to the needs and the goals of our customers. So thanks again for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Matt?
Cool. Yeah. My name's Matthew Sweezey. Feel free. Most people just call me Sweezey. Everyone in the audience, if you ever meet me in real person, just say, hey, what's up, Sweezey? Yeah. The funniest part was like, someone's like, that's your nickname? I was like, no, that's my actual name. But anyways, Director of Market Strategy at Salesforce. I recently published a new book for Harvard Business called The Context Marketing Revolution, and really dive into the future of marketing. So really own that POV for the organization of Salesforce and really looking at what does the future look like in terms of how do we make our customers more efficient and better, and how do we help them have better relationships with their customers through the medium of marketing.
Awesome.
I like Jason said, super excited to have you both with us. And I think this kind of discussion about experience versus outcomes are two key topics that everybody in the world of customer success has forefront and center in their minds. Sometimes it's difficult to understand what we mean by it, and how you bring them together is that magical source. So this is, I am super excited about this. And Dave, I used to work with ExactTarget before it was acquired by Salesforce. So I'm going back, wow, must be
very good.
It must be 15, 16 years ago, but I remember it. And it was a really phenomenal tool. And we were using Salesforce separately at the same time. Both of you guys really excited about this.
Excellent. It was a fun ride.
Absolutely. I think in the industry too, you read so much about customer experience these days, and everyone's talking about that and user experience and UX and all the other good stuff going on. And people mention outcomes almost as an afterthought in some regards, though it's slowly picking up. But I'd love to get your thoughts, guys. Can you create a little context for us, and what made you start looking into the differences between experience and outcomes, and why should SaaS companies be making this distinction?
Matt starts us off here because he's been doing a lot of research on his end. It really was a catalyst for our work. So Matt, take it away.
Cool, man. So really what happened was about the middle of June of last year, me and a colleague, Karen Manji, decided to sit down with a bunch of chief customer officers and chief experience officers and really dig into how has COVID changed customer experience. Mm-hmm. So we do these deep interviews, and across all interviews, and we're talking about heads of major organizations from experience from a wide range of backgrounds. And one common theme stood out above all others, which was this move to outcomes. And this is doing everything from changing the go-to-market strategy from companies. It's making companies question, are we a product company or a service company? By the way, that was a SaaS-based company who was asking that question. Are we a product or a service company? So it's even the most progressive are evolving. And the main quote that I've just hung my hat on and just love to bring up, which kind of really iterates this and just brings this notion home, is when I heard a chief experience officer say the following. They said, we have happy customers with great experiences leave all the time, and we have unhappy customers with bad experiences stay. The differences are the outcomes that they receive. And when you really start to think about it, and you think about it from the problems that we as experienced professionals and marketers have, it's we have resource allocations. Yes, we know experiences are powerful, but then there's lots of problems. Like, how do we measure that? How do we prove that? Then there's the other aspects, such as, is that exactly what the customer wants? And then it's what experiences do we focus on? And when we really shift that lens to say, experience is a method, but outcome is the actual customer goal. When we start to align around, that's when all this magic starts to happen. Because if you then put this in the context of the greater conversation that we're all having, right? Digital transformation, how do we move out of silos, and how do we then start to orchestrate around key customer moments? What are we orchestrating? We're orchestrating those outcomes. So this is an aspect of digital transformation. This is an aspect of organizational transformation. This is really a big aspect of how we go to market, because we start to open up radically new doors that were never possible before. Outcome-based pricing, outcome-based selling, outcome-based service and support. It's a whole new frontier, and it all was just really brought to my attention when we really started doing those interviews with those chief experience officers.
Why do you think it's such a big challenge? To get that, it must have been quite a kind of an eye-opener when you sat down with all of these senior execs and everybody's resonating the same challenge. Why do you think it is?
I think the biggest reason is twofold. One is they had been going down this path for a while. Time to value had been a thing. Most everyone on this call knows time to value. We'd look at it. But I think really what happened was COVID was the catalyst, because you had these methods. And really, if we boil it down to what's the problem is the consumers are financially constrained. It doesn't matter if it's a B2B organization or a B2C customer, they're financially constrained. And when an individual is constrained, they make decisions differently. And what they really want is the outcome, because if I have a finite amount of resources to invest, I need the thing most specifically that I want. I don't need any other fluff. So then we start to see outcome-based everything, which is now that I can then sell you the outcome rather than just selling you the thing with the hope of an outcome. So it's a different move. And that's when, then this really brought me back to Dave and saying, hey, Dave, this is what I saw. I know you guys are doing stuff on this. Let's think about what we can do here. And that's what really brought this whole idea to light, was this revelation, or this understanding that I came out with. And then Dave's like, yeah, we're working on it. We know it too. So that's like where this synergy came from.
And Jason, I'll add to that and say that I think it comes back to just the way that our organizations have been built, a very internal focused perspective where it's been pretty selfish, frankly. And what's happening is people are realizing, ironically, that it is about the customer, and we need to serve the customer to the best of our abilities. And we can break it down more. The guide that is the customer is really important to understand. And then we need to reorient around the outcomes that they need to achieve. But part of the big problem is that we've been very internal focused. And now I think people are starting to realize that it's got to be more, if we're going to be truly customer centric, we got to break that down and understand what that actually means.
I think that aligns, the podcast that we did only the other week, Jason, about kind of customer centricity. It is that, for me, customer centricity is all about aligning around the customer. And like you say, it does. A lot of organizations would almost struggle with it. So of course we're about the customer. I mean, it seems a daft thing for people to say, yeah, we're not focused on the customer, but things have changed. It's been about technology, about product, and we've got to make sure the customer is back at the center of everything. For, like you say, that every organization, however big or small, there are still silos.
Yeah. And I think we've got to challenge, what does it mean to be customer centric?
Absolutely.
We can, and exactly to the point of the collaboration here, the experience is important, and Matt does a great job of kind of articulating that. But what's on the other end of those experiences? Well, the customer came to us because they have a problem, but we often lose sight of the importance of solving that problem. So I think it comes back to really breaking down and redefining in many ways what it means to be customer centric. But it's not rocket science. It is, let's literally just stay focused on what matters most to the customer, which is delivering business impact to their organizations.
Yeah.
Matt, okay. I was going to say, I really love what you said as well, too, about people being financially constrained and how that really was the catalyst for this. Because I think that comes back to the perception that, outcomes are a necessity, but to your point, the experience is in some ways a luxury, whether you're having the high-end sedan or the big luxury meal. I think more and more folks in the SaaS world are now realizing that they've skipped over the necessity part to focus on the luxury back when times are good.
Exactly. And it's not that experiences are wrong. They're completely correct. It's just that we have to understand the correct formula, which is experiences are the method that we use to deliver the outcomes. Because no customer, like even we run the data, right? So last year it was 84% of consumers say the experience is just as important to the product or service. But no consumer ever wakes up saying, damn, I want a good experience today. But experience is just the way that we efficiently deliver the outcomes. We make it easier for them to achieve that. That's a better experience. And when there is a world where experience isn't focused on, any experience is competitive differentiation. But we must remember the experience economy, right? Harvard Business, in my opinion, one of the most seminal business books of the past 2 decades. It was originally published in 1999. So we've been focused on experiences for a long time. It's a well-known thing. This is the next evolution of competitive differentiation. It's not that I can just give you a good experience. It's that I can deliver the best outcome via the best experience.
I think it's a fascinating thing to talk about. And if you look at COVID, and I do think customer service and experience throughout COVID has got worse. And I think, sadly, it's almost become an acceptable fact that you can put up with poor experiences. And it's almost shifted what people's expectations are, that they're no longer thinking this experience isn't right. And the number of big organizations, but if I look at banks particularly, you phone up a bank and a year down the line, there's still a voicemail or a recording that says, due to the pandemic, guys, you've had a year to deal with this. You need to reset and rebase what the experiences are. And it is trying to, what do we want? And are those experiences shifting? What do you guys, a question back for you guys then, this idea of an engineered outcome, tell us a bit more about that and how it's new and different from what's happening today.
You want to start with that one, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing we're calling out here in the ebook is that there just needs to be a more informed guide for the management of the customer relationship. So when we talk about engineering outcomes, it is thinking about how we create better structure within the organization to serve the customer and help them achieve their outcomes. So it is, we think about the life cycle, it's reflecting on what is the customer life cycle relative to the outcomes that the customer needs to achieve. And we're very familiar with these journey mapping exercises, and it really can align to that, but it's really specific to the needs of the customer. And then the experiences complement that. But there's in the ebook, a graphic that I think is helpful, where we're talking about the formation of the relationship early on, and this agreement as we come together with our customers to define and document a set of outcomes that we're going to go achieve together. And then we are positioning our products and services to go off and achieve those outcomes over time. And then there's milestones along the way. But what we're proposing is that we need to enable the organization in new ways and in better ways, our employees, to work in a context that puts them in a position to serve the customer, so that the customer is in a position to achieve their outcomes. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about engineering outcomes.
Let's follow on with that. When we think about experiences, we know an experience just doesn't happen, right? You just don't throw somebody in a room with things and a good experience happens. It has to be well designed, right? Human-centered design is how we know to create the best experience. It's no different with an outcome. You can't just have a basic set of things and expect outcomes to happen. That's what most organizations have, right? And they expect good, but what we must realize is that we must organize these, we must orchestrate these outcomes. And when you start to then see what is required to orchestrate them, there's a whole range of things. Number one is, this is not the company saying, hey, customer, I'm going to tell you what your outcome is supposed to be. Number one is, we're working with the customers to understand what is the outcome that you want. And then even going as advanced as saying, okay, we know what you want to do. Now let's look at your current state. Where are you in your maturity model on getting there? Right? What is the realistic time frame to get you to where you want to be? And then let's break that down into milestones. And then this then opens up radically new doors of all kinds of different aspects of new types of business reviews, new types of roles inside the organization, new types of technology that we need to use, new types of alignment methodologies. And so I think there's a whole lot, but it must be orchestrated. It just doesn't happen randomly.
I'm curious to get your take as well too, because one of the things that we've often talked about is that the buyer also needs to be more savvy about how they're going to drive success in their own organization. And when I think back to, and we've mentioned this on some other podcasts that we've done, the whole reason we have customer success teams is many organizations or buyers, they're not good at getting people to adopt and to create value with technology in their own organization. They need help there. If they could get success on their own, they wouldn't need a customer success group and things like that. What are the responsibilities of a buyer's organization to change how they engage with their customers or with their suppliers to really figure out how are we going to work together and partner to make sure that we're both successful through this process? What should a buyer be doing differently?
I'm going to start with that one. And I don't know if the answer is they should be doing anything really differently. Anytime we buy something, we all come with the same expectation of, I'm going to benefit from this relationship. That's why we engage in those relationships. I think it's on the onus of the brand, the business, the vendor, the supplier, to then help them achieve those outcomes. I think the individual already comes with the desire to get those things. I think what they don't know is how to do it. And that once again goes back to the onus. It's on us to help them do those things. So I think what has to happen is customer comes with the same expectations of outcome is delivered. I think they need to come with the expectation of now the company is going to help them get those expectations in a very systematic and scalable and detailed way. And that's really, I think, the difference is they just need to understand that there are steps and there's milestones. And these are all conversations we have with people and this is where we start to get into competitive differentiation from a selling standpoint of if this is how you're going to market, if this is how you're selling. Those are very competitive differentiations of these conversations. So I don't know. I don't think the customer shows up at anything different. I think we teach them that to achieve the outcomes that you desire, here's a new and better method to do that. I think that's all we're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's, in my experience, that it is where it breaks down. We haven't properly set expectations early on how we're going to go about the management of the relationship over time. And I think that is on the supplier, but the buyer is going to buy into that if they understand it. So then we know that it takes to make it successful. But to Matt's point, it's our responsibility to really set the tone there, because it can break down if we don't. But then we do appreciate that we need to hold both sides accountable in that exercise. And what we're proposing here is that the more structure we can have in this realm, the easier it is for both sides to understand what it's going to take to be successful over the long term. And it really is, setting the expectation that this is a long-term exercise, and we're doing this for a reason. Sometimes we have to remind our customers why we're doing what we're doing, especially as we get into multi-year agreements, which is what we all want. But it's a marathon, so we need to consistently be working within the proper context and in a collaborative way.
I love that analogy about it being a marathon, because it is. This is changing our mindset. And we've spoken about this before, but it isn't about just that initial win. You want a long-term partnership where you're delivering value to your customer, to their customers, but also there's value in it for you. And it is that mutual success that we get. How do you, that shifting of a mindset to think about this as a partnership? It is a difficult thing to do, but there's an equal shift when you shift thinking about experiences to then the idea about engineering outcomes. What do you see as the biggest challenges for SaaS vendors and suppliers when they're trying to make that shift?
You want to start with that one, Dave?
Yeah, I think it is actually back to some of the points earlier. It's a kind of cultural thing, and it's back to, are we truly customer centric, and then do we truly understand the needs of the customer? And so I think that it starts there, but it's also, to your point, Jason, it's one of the challenges. And Matt says this well, it's a leadership thing. It's got to come from the C-suite, from the CEO. We have to be aligned internally on our mission relative to customer service and customer support and management. If we don't understand at the highest levels why we're in it in the first place, then the rest of the organization is going to have a hard time following. So I think that's where it starts, but that's where a lot of the problems can occur.
Yeah, I'll just go to some data on that one. In all of the research that we've done, both in the state of marketing for the past 4 years, I wrote about this in my book, but the number one difference between high-performing marketing organizations and everyone else is full executive buy-in to a new idea of marketing, where marketing is moved out of a silo and they become the owners and sustainers of all customer experiences. That's the basic definition of what a high-performing marketing organization is. When we then do this follow-up research in June of last year, same thing. Every customer we talked to, they all had double down on experience. We know that because they had job titles, Chief Experience Officer, and they had a lot of meat behind them. It wasn't just, as one said, this is not a paper tiger role. We have budget, we have authority, we have goals, and we're delivering. What they also said is, we've been going down these paths for years. 6 years was not uncommon. 3 years was the average of how long they've been moving down this pathway to really double down on experiences. Number one, to the point of, if you don't have full executive approval to go down this path, it's not going to happen. And that's the truth of the move to experiences and then the next move to outcomes. So that's where it starts, period.
You said that some groups have been working on this for 6 years, and I saw in the ebook where you also laid out a maturity model for the steps and phases you should go through. And I'm a big fan of maturity models, and I think it breaks it down nicely so people don't get overwhelmed. If an organization's just trying to make this shift or just becoming aware of the shift, that the need to go from experience to outcomes, what are some of the first steps they should take, and how quickly do you think the average SaaS company can make that shift?
You want to start on that one, Dave? And
Yeah, absolutely. So, to the point of internal alignment, what we are proposing is that is where this starts. It is, we need to internally be talking the same language across marketing, sales, success, product. And then that kind of spills over into the way that we start to organize with the customer. And the maturity model speaks to alignment first and foremost, and it seems simple, but we really do need to just be disciplined there and ensure that we are aligned from day one with our customers. But what we're arguing is that starts with the way that we're talking to the market, and then the way that we are developing our sales process relative to outcome language, and then the formation of the initial success plan that then is being transitioned into the post-sales world. But then it steps into needing to deliver and leveraging our products and services in the right ways to set the customer up for success over the long term. In other words, if we're not using the product or leveraging services in the right way, we don't have a chance. And there then is a path to what we believe is where we need to be, which is that stage 4, stage 5, where we are being able to articulate the value that's being delivered relative to the outcomes that we set out to achieve initially. And we are also proposing that there's this last mile that has not been figured out at all, which is exchanging data in new ways. Oftentimes the customer owns a data set that is really the KPI set that we should be aligning to and ultimately influencing. We're asking big questions like, what would it look like if we come together collaboratively and share information in new ways? So that's at a high level. And what we know is that there's an evolution that takes place here relative to those stages. But we wanted to try and just simplify it, break it down, and just talk logically about how this relationship with the customer can unfold relative to the outcomes they want to achieve.
Yeah, and I'll add some little more specific meat on those stages. We talked about number 1 is executive alignment, right? Once you have that alignment, you can then start to do these different types of things internally, which is number 1 is co-owning metrics. You can't just decentralize day one. You're going to stair step into these things. And step 1 to do that is to co-own. So sales and marketing success, that's step 1. Then you start to be able to then rally around key numbers, and you start to decentralize. That's then the next step of really starting to then orchestrate around these key customer moments. Third is then thinking about when we're doing these things, it's new ways of working, right? Because we are co-collaborating with the customer. This is not you dictating what is going to happen. This is you collaborating with them and opening up and saying, here's what we can do. What do we want to do together? Then getting buy-in and commitment from both sides, then creating that plan and moving that plan forward. So then once you get past that, you then start looking at, all right, new metrics, right? How are they going to measure the delivery of these outcomes? Really, that's the organization moving out of NPS and much more focus on time to value. And in the ebook, you'll read a quote that said, we have no longer leaving NPS as the North Star. We've now replaced it with time to value. And in fact, these customers are measuring customer success with the following math equation of customer outcomes divided by customer experience, where outcomes are weighed heavier than the experience. So then you move past that and go even further. And you say, okay, now that we start to understand what it takes, we've gotten buy-in. Now we can then get even more specific, and we can start to then align what we want, what we think your timeline to outcome delivery is based on the maturity model of where you are on that path. And because everyone's going to have a different time to value based on what your maturity is in that current scenario. What is the scenario? And then you start to get mature and more mature. So there's lots of little stair steps that work all the way across. And then there's the final thing, which is Dave's talking about, which is there's new technology that we need to put in place. Because as we think about this this is theoretical, right? But when we start to talk about how does this actually happen, there has to be a living document. Because if you take this to the extreme, let's go to the extreme example. We end up with outcome-based pricing, which means that we are no longer selling a thing, we're selling outcomes. And you're only going to pay me for the outcomes, and you're going to pay me based on the outcomes. So I produce better outcomes, I get a higher payment. I produce lower outcomes, I get a lower payment. We're already starting to see this happen in the marketplace. Honeywell's doing this, Baer's doing this from a consumer side, Metro Mile's doing this. So to do that, to Dave's point, there has to be some type of connection, right? Whether this is some type of a blockchain thing where we set up, okay, here's going to be the outcome, here's going to be the data feeds. Once it hits this number, this is what the payment becomes, or whatever it's going to be. It's just a simple living document. There's a whole nother aspect to that. So I think once we talk about the high level, and then those are the actual steps in between.
I think it's an incredible journey, and everyone knows the outcome of where we want to get to for this, but how you get there isn't simple. There are some big challenges, but I love kind of that talking through the different steps we can take. Guys, look, huge thank you. We've loved talking to you. This is something that I think is going to resonate with all of our listeners. But how do we always like to end with a bold challenge question? Sorry, it's my wife calling me on Alexa shouting out there. Apologies for that. We always like to end with a bold challenge question for our listeners here and really allow them to take some bold actions to how they're going to improve their practices. But what would you suggest as bold actions that our listeners could take right now to how they improve delivering their outcomes to their customers and how they can make that shift themselves to engineering outcomes?
I'd say step one is challenge the notion of NPS. I think that's going to be the first step of saying, is this the correct North Star for our organization to deliver the best customer-centric experience? Ask that question and then look at how you're measuring that, what effects that's got. Is it a direct attribution to ROI? Is that your North Star? And then say, if that's not, can we move to time to value? Can we find a better method? And then can we start to align around this notion of outcomes? I mean, I'd say that's step one.
I'll throw one in too, since you got two of us, but I challenge everybody to really reflect on, do we understand, or do you understand the needs of your customer? And come back to that often. And when you think you do, ask again, push on that question, because oftentimes we're not as in touch with the needs of our customer as we think we are.
Wow, fantastic. Guys, thank you so much from both of us here. We really appreciate it. And for everyone listening, down in the show notes, you'll find links to the ebook. So go and check that out, and links to get in touch with both Matt and Dave as well too. So guys, thank you so much for me over here in Washington, DC.
And thank you from me, guys. I love the 2 for the price of 1 bold challenge question at the end. Superb. Really enjoyed the conversation. This is a huge topic, and I'd love to do another one with you guys in the future.
Cool.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Cheers, guys.